taught you to hate the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Most of us blacks, or Negroes as he called us, really thought we were free without being aware that in our subconscious, all those chains we thought had been struck off were still there. And there were many ways where what really motivated us was our desire to be loved by the white man. Malcolm meant to lance that sense of inferiority. He knew it would be painful. He knew that people could kill you because of it, but he dared to take that risk.
He was saying something over and above that of any other leader of that day. While the other leaders were begging for entry into the house of their oppressor, he was telling you, build your own house.
Welcome to the Gilchrist experience. As you see, that's an old Roland I ran for years, some 25 years ago when we were at 59th Street. Here today we're in the firehouse, 104th, Lex and 3rd, and 25 years later. But even further back, it goes this Malcolm theme of us, you know, feeling inferior and wanting the white man to love us. So we go back to the 50s when Malcolm came about and started stirring our spirits about being militant. And when we were too busy taking care of business, sort of getting along, trying to go to school and trying to get further ahead, and was getting around things rather than being confrontational, which was the difference between Malcolm and Martin. So today we have a youngster at 35, me being an elder, 81, and we're showing a difference in flavor and an appeal of how we deal with racism and being black in America. Welcome to the show, Minister Ronald McHenry, a new member of National Action Network. Welcome to the show, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Gilchrist. I am honored to be with you here this evening. And as we were watching the Malcolm sort of delivery, I am compelled. I have always, you know, Malcolm has always been a big hero of mine. Mm-hmm. And to hear him talk about the inferior complex that we have, mm-hmm. and to understand that it's not by default that we feel this way, mm-hmm. that it was put on us. So when we talk about the inferiority complex, we're actually talking about a white supremacy system that has been built to keep our minds and hearts at bay. Mm-hmm. There's this expression, if you have an elephant, and if you put the chain around an elephant's leg as a baby, the elephant will kick and not be able to get loose. Mm-hmm. But as it grows into its full power, mm-hmm. in an adult elephant, it will look at that chain and not even kick anymore, mm-hmm. because it's trained its mind all its life that that chain is too strong to be broken, even though it just takes one swoop and pow. Mm-hmm. And the system has done this with our families. It's done this with our education. It's done this with healthcare. Mm-hmm. It's done this with every facet of life in America where it's marginalized black and brown people. Mm-hmm. So we can kick free. And Malcolm was saying, hey, I mm-hmm. understand that the system has put this chain on you, mm-hmm. but it's not what you think. You can break out. You may be in this, but you're not this.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Brilliantly said. That brings to mind Roland. The first time I saw Ronald give a presentation was at National Action Network. He's an artist also. He did some portraits of Rev and several others I can't There was
Amelia Boykins, John
Yeah.
Lewis, just a lot of civil rights icons.
all right,
In the day and age of where most of our rights are being stripped from us as Americans,
right.
even though we built this country, when we're talking about voting rights on the line, I created this exhibition to just raise consciousness, to bring people together with the message.
And we want to show one of those items. This is item 1, and this is Minister Ronald McHenry.
Any questions? Any questions in the audience? Yes, sir.
What's going on, champ? How you feel?
I stopped it.
How do I feel? I feel blessed and highly favored. How about you?
What I'm talking about. I feel the same. Absolutely.
This one.
I do.
Will too.
I hear exactly what you said, and I feel it all. Every day when I'm out in society, going to work or just doing my day-to-day, dealing with other people and so on and so forth, I found it something that I do when I'm dealing with other black people, particularly black men, right? So I was talking to a kid in Queens one day, and we were just talking about his white guy stories, stuff in the neighborhood. And I was explaining to him that, unfortunately, we're in a space where the biggest threat to a black man is another black man. This is what I'm telling him. And I said, this is the psychological damage that we're in. It's not every single black man out, so on and so forth. And we have this program that's in the mind of a lot of black men on how we deal with each other. Too much macho, too much gunplay, too much, I got this, you ain't got that, too much, I'm hitting your girl, like it's just it's heavy. So, when I'm dealing with the black men, especially the youth, half of them think I'm their age, I'm 40, I think I'm 27, cool, whatever. I try to touch on that psychological damage. Let them know that you don't have to walk around being gangster. You don't have to walk around thinking you have to have a gun just to go to the store. Everything will have to be, I got this, you don't got that. Like all this.
So I just want to segue, as I, and I thank you for sharing how you feel, and I'm sure the art brought that out. I was reading the scripture the other day, Psalms 137. It has 9 verses. And it begins to talk about the people of Jerusalem who were being captive by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. And all of Israel had to be taken up and stripped, right? And they all were taken into bondage. And so this 137th division of Psalms is a lament. And it starts out by saying, right, they asked us to sing the Lord's song by the river. What river are we talking about? We're talking about the Euphrates River. And it says that we hung up our harps on the poplar or the willow tree, and we refused to sing the Lord's song. And it says, but let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember the Lord's song. And how does this segue into what you're saying? We may be in Babylon, but we're not Babylonians. They can take our clothes, but that does not make us a Babylonian. They can take our bracelet, that does not make us a Babylonian. They can break up our families, that does not make us a Babylonian. But it's important to always sing the Lord's song because it's going to cause you to remember who you are. And that's why I say it's important for us to get in touch with our history and our past. Right? Because if we don't understand the history, where do we go from here? As the Reverend says, Moses crossed the Sea of Reeds, but Joshua had to go across the Jordan. And if we don't cling back to the lineage and to the movement, we're not going to know how to get over certain traumas in our neighborhood. I know a lot of people talk about black on black crime, but they don't ever talk about white on white crime. They don't ever talk about domestic situations in white communities. And yet, our communities are flooded with the worst sort of things, from education to healthcare to guns to police reform. All kinds of things happen in our community that don't happen in others. So we just have to continue to do the work. And we all have different skill sets. We all have to get that message out. We just got to continue to do the work. We all have to do our part. There's so many hands that went up. Yes, Ashley?
See, that's an answer to what I think the youth need to hear. You know, it's an answer from youth. I thought that was well put, and it gives black people a sense of hope, because I believe if you're black in America and you don't have any God in your heart, you're a dead man. You're walking around lost. So if you're hating too much, as Malcolm portrayed, you know, all white people were devils, but he changed at the end and found out that he was uniting more so with Martin. But you have answers for the youth. You answered the guy's question about how do you deal with kids that are wannabe gangsters. And I'm looking for answers like that myself.
So I work in the high school. I'm an educator. I teach science.
Mm-hmm.
I also teach the 9th grade, I teach the 11th grade, and I teach the 12th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And
You teach 12th grade?
I teach a variety of grades, yes. I teach anatomy and physiology and some other electives.
Wasn't that the toughest? 12?
In my experience, it's actually middle school, 7th grade. That period of where there's a transition between being a boy and growing into a man, and there's so much people in our community that don't have guidance.
Right.
And so you find that in this trauma, who are you going to be? And that's what I ask many of my students. What do you want to do when you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
And many of them envision themselves or even acting in the gangster role.
Yeah.
And so you ask yourself why, right?
Mm-hmm.
As that's the question we ask ourselves, why? When I ask my students, what do you want to be? The first answers are, and it's a lot of students, it's not just a few. I want to be in basketball,
Mm-hmm.
I want to be in football, or I want to be a rapper. None of them are really going to say I want to be a gangster, but what is the reason for this, right? We have been conditioned to see ourselves in particular roles.
Mm-hmm.
Society has advertised to us that we're just this and we're just that.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a young youth, when you see yourself, you don't see yourself as a doctor because 70 to 80% of doctors are not you.
Mm-hmm.
70% of teachers are not you. And all of these professions don't reflect you. So you're going to look to what does reflect you. And so when you see the streets, you see yourself, right? Because you're not taught anything different.
Mm-hmm.
You're solicited at a young age by people who are older than you to stand on the corner. So there's a real situation in our neighborhood of where we need people who make it out to come back, to show that it's not just what you see on the outside, that there's a path that is that there's a path of where we can excel. We come out of Africa. Math and science come out of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
We are engineers. We built civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Our history is not taught on purpose. There's a reason why they're striking our curriculum that of who we are and where we come from. It's to degrade the fact that we are more than the situation they put us in.
Mm-hmm.
In this answer on the clip, I start talking about the 137th Psalm. And I chose that verse because it talked about how a people who were doctors, lawyers, clergy members were stripped from their profession and brought into bondage. A lot of us don't understand that in many ways we are still in bondage. We're just in 21st century bondage. And that it looks different than what it looked like then, but we have to break out of this now. And so I began to describe that psalm by the prophet. It's actually one of the most scariest psalm and bloodiest psalm in the whole book of Psalms, because it describes, the psalmist describes himself as wanting to kill his captors. And so he is losing himself on the road of Babylon, which is by the Euphrates, as I described. And so he says, I can throw my harp on the willow trees because I will not reduce who I am to your entertainment. They asked him to sing a song, to sing the Lord's song. And so it goes back to us remembering who we are. They have us convinced that we're here and that we're in the status that we're in as far as being educated and that we have the best thing in the world. We had all of that where we came from. You took us out of that. You stripped us from our honor, from our lineage, from our name, and from our heritage. And then you told us that you would give reparations, but you still haven't. And so there's so many empty promises since we've been here. The best way, as Malcolm described, is we don't need another community or another culture coming to describe to us the best things for ourselves. For God has given us the material to build our own community. We don't need to eat at their table. We can build a table of our own.
Well said, man. See, that's our future. That's our future, right there. Now, how many of the youths can we get on that same page? All right, just to regress and go back to the early beginnings of Malcolm and Martin, which is well to review how we battled each other back then. And the result of the battle came that Reverend Sharpton, I believe, you know, he's a disciple of Martin, and he's got a little Malcolm in it. So we all need to progress in mindset and get out of this hole that we're in. And it takes the elders, such as myself, and the youth, such as Ron, to talk to one another, to relate our past histories. So I, in my Gilchrist experience, I'm reaching back for old statesmen like Malcolm and Martin, who are my heroes. But initially I want to run, and I've forgotten what 3 was. Run item 3, and we'll get back to you right after this rolling. I believe it's Gil Noble. Isn't that 3?
The white man pays Reverend Martin Luther King, subsidizes Reverend Martin Luther King, so that Reverend Martin Luther King can continue to teach the Negroes to be defenseless. That's what you mean by nonviolent. Be defenseless. Be defenseless in the face of one of the most cruel beasts that has ever taken the people into captivity. That's this American white man. And they have proved it throughout the country by the police dogs and the police clubs. 100 years ago, they used to put on a white sheet and use a bloodhound against Negroes. Today, they have taken off the white sheet and put on police uniforms. They've traded in the bloodhounds for police dogs, and they're still doing the same thing. And just as Uncle Tom, back during slavery, used to keep the Negroes from resisting the bloodhound or resisting the Ku Klux Klan by teaching them to love their enemy or pray for those who use them despitefully. Today, Martin Luther King is just a 20th century or modern Uncle Tom or a religious Uncle Tom who is doing the same thing today to keep Negroes defenseless in the face of attack that Uncle Tom did on the plantation to keep those Negroes defenseless in the face of the attack of the Klan in that
Well,
day.
I don't think of love as, in this context, as emotional bosh. I don't think of it as a weak force. But I think of love as something strong and that organizes itself into powerful direct action. Now, this is what I tried to teach in the struggle in the South, that we are not engaged in a struggle that means we sit down and do nothing. That there's a great deal of difference between non-resistance to evil and non-violent resistance. Non-resistance leaves you in a state of stagnant passivity and deadened complacency, wherein non-violent resistance means that you do resist in a very strong and determined manner. And I think some of the criticisms of nonviolence, or some of the critics, fail to realize that we are talking about something very strong, and they confuse non-resistance with nonviolence.
The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to give Negroes a chance to sit in a segregated restaurant beside the same white man who had brutalized them for 400 years. The goal of Dr. Martin Luther King is to get Negroes to forgive the people who have brutalized them for 400 years by by lulling them to sleep and making them forgetting what those whites had done to them. But the masses of black people in America today don't go for what Martin Luther King is putting down. As you said in one of your articles, it's psychologically insecure, something of that sort. I forget how you put it. But you didn't endorse what Martin Luther King was doing yourself.
I do not reject his goals of full integration and full equality rights for American citizens. Do you reject these goals?
If you don't think that he's walking on the right road, I'm quite sure you don't agree that he'll get to the right place. And if you would classify his method as psychologically unrealistic, I think that if a man's method is psychologically unrealistic, which means the road or the means or the method that he's using, I think as a psychologist, you'd be very doubtful
I don't think
that he would reach the right.
If anyone has ever lived with a nonviolent movement in the South, from Montgomery on through the Freedom Rides and through the sit-in movement and the recent Birmingham movement, and see the reactions of many of the extremists and reactionaries in the white community, he wouldn't say that this movement makes, this philosophy makes them comfortable. I think it arouses a sense of shame within them often, in many instances. I think it does something to touch the conscience and establish a sense of guilt. Now, so often people respond to guilt by engaging more in the guilt-evoking act in an attempt to drown the sense of guilt. But this approach certainly doesn't make the white man feel comfortable. It disturbs the other things, conscience, and it disturbs this sense of contentment. Nothing will.
You know, that gives you a good idea of how we battled each other between Martin and Malcolm. We know the end results of this. Malcolm and the movement, you know what happened, Malcolm was assassinated by his own folks. People try to say Malcolm was getting too powerful. We'll go over that later. But I just wanted to get to a point of how we saw Malcolm as elders. You know, youth can see from history the end results, but during that period of time, I mean, when Malcolm was out, I was like Gil Noble. Now, I'm going to run this other item so we can talk about the appearance of, you know, what I lived through. And anybody over 60 should really understand. You know, how we as black people dealt with racism and how to be successful in life. And it wasn't talking about calling the white people, all white people weren't devils, because some of our best friends, especially the Jewish people in those days, were our best friends. Because they would just come out of, you know, my own personal experience. My mother worked for a Jewish family in the 40s during the Holocaust, you know, so Jews had worse oppression than we had at that time. So there was there was a resentment towards the establishment. I remember at a time that, well, we all know the story, but let's watch Gil Noble, my hero. This is the only reason I'm a broadcaster today, because here's my mentor. Here's a guy I loved talking to, and I did 3 shows with, and I was in awe of this man, because he brought us our history. Thank you. Show us that rolling, please.
Fascinated that there was a brother who lived in the projects, and he called me aside and he said, I'll tell you why Malcolm was killed. I said, what do you mean? He said, coming up to my apartment. So I went and he gave me a recording he had made of Malcolm at one of his speeches. And so for the first time, I heard Malcolm unedited, in context.
The media's coverage
of
awful. Malcolm versus the real deal.
It was awful. Mm-hmm. And so I learned about Malcolm, and I realized that I had been had. I realized that
you
I had
bought what the media had told you.
Yes, I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. But when I heard Malcolm's entire presentation, everything fell in line, and it was logical. And it made me understand that there's no sin in being angry. In fact, if you're not angry, there's something wrong with you.
And why do you think Malcolm was killed?
I think
real issues.
I think that there are a number.
You know, welcome back. There's a little bit of confusion here, but I went to run another item, was talking about the beginnings, how we felt about Malcolm and how he affected a lot of his elders or people that weren't Muslims and didn't believe in changing their names, and how we thought the man was kind of strange because of his beliefs. I mean, he wanted to take us away from church and pork and fornication and all these other luxuries we had and we were enjoying. And this is the integration time. You know, you know, blacks were popular these days. I mean, everybody's having fun. And let's run that piece, because I was alive and well. I was 24 when Malcolm was killed, in 65. So these are my times.
My first inoculation was Dr. King.
Yeah.
And then that led me to Adam Powell and a lot of the people. But I was put off by Malcolm X.
Why?
Because what he was saying and the way he was saying it was too blunt. It was dangerous. And you didn't say those things in those days. I told you we had been socialized as kids to get around wrong, not to confront it. And Malcolm spoke in very declarative terms, and he said some terrible things about white people that we thought, but you would never express it, you see. He talked about the way this country was not a democracy but a hypocrisy, and he talked about what had been happening to us down south and up south. And he was not shy. He had and he was very, very intimidating. I'm man enough to admit it. There are a lot of people who are my age who will speak, you know, with love about Malcolm as though it had always been that way, but that's not so. He scared a lot of us to death. And then, mind you, I had this apartment, a bachelor apartment on Convent Avenue, and I'd been having a lot of fun, you know. And here he comes talking about a different way of life. First of all, he dropped his last name. Well, we had been socialized to take great pride in our last name. The more European it sounded, the better. There was not a flinch about, you know, noble. Oh, that's wonderful. If it wasn't French enough, you put an ETT on it, you know, to make it sound more French. And so here's a man who dropped his good last name and replaced it with an X. I thought the man was crazy. And then he talked about discipline. And he talked
self-discipline?
Self-discipline. He said that we do not believe in drinking. And at the time I would have a taste. And he said that we don't smoke cigarettes with or without a label on them. And I would smoke, you know, with a label.
Yes.
And he said, we don't eat pork. Well, you know, I love me some ribs. And then he said, we don't fornicate.
Yes.
And so psychologically, I said, Malcolm, I'll see you later.
Yes.
You know, and all. But what he was doing in deprecating whiteness, I came to understand later that he was rearranging the balance that we needed, because we had glorified whiteness and deprecated blackness. And so he was tilting, using exaggerated terms, to give us a sense of self and to take whites down a little as they needed to be. And the discipline that he was talking about were things that we really needed to address. But I couldn't swallow that at the time. So jumping forward in time, a lot of things happened in the struggle, and Malcolm was struck down in 65, and I never went to hear him speak. My only impression of Malcolm was on the sound bites on the evening news. And if there was a rally in Harlem, where I'm living now, I'm living in Harlem, and he would have a rally 10 blocks away, I would go in the other direction.
Did
because
he
I
have a
didn't.
mosque there?
He had a mosque on 116th Street, and I didn't live too far away from there. But I went out of my way to avoid this man because I thought he was wrong. I had white.
As you see there, I was also in the same mode. I didn't think Malcolm was insane either, and all that he wanted to do, and he was calling all white people devils, and he was in a different religion. He had all these restrictions. For the people who had went that route, like Malcolm himself had been in prison, and he learned the Muslim religion from prison. I was a Baptist, and this was a strange religion to me, so they were quite strange to us. But when you finally listen to Malcolm, what he had to say, it made sense. Well, Gil shows in another piece how he learned to understand how Malcolm was. But always after people die, do we pay attention. The same thing with Martin. Martin's last real statement and challenge to the government was his speech at Riverside Church against the 67, April 4th, 1967. And he died exactly a year later, on April 4th, 1968. But Martin came out against the war. And Johnson, who had given us civil rights bills, on top of it was and Johnson felt betrayed because Martin came out for what was right. The Vietnam War was wrong, and Johnson was wrong, and Martin told him that. And a year later, everybody turned on Martin. So we see all our heroes don't gather any true recognition until they're dead and gone. Now we can appreciate Martin and Malcolm. But when they were alive, most of us didn't know. I didn't get to know Malcolm until I started doing television shows with his bodyguard, Reverend Charles Kenyatta, who had changed from the Muslim religion to Baptism. So, everybody evolves. When you finally found that all white people aren't devils, but that was Malcolm's stance before he died. I have another piece by him, but you see how everything turns, but we found that there's one race, the human race, and we have to learn to understand what our tribal problems are. Everybody's tribal. They're in their own, as we have with the youth today. You see the difference, but you pay attention to what happened in the past. All right, so we know, you as an educator know your history, but the youth, the black youth of today, the history is hidden. So we have that problem, and you're one of the educators that bring this to to the youth's attention. So what say you, Ronald, Minister?
Well, I'm an educator, I'm a minister, and I'm also an artist, and through all those three vehicles, I try to decolonize the thought process behind art, behind education, and behind ministry. My thought process when it comes to Malcolm and Martin is that they were in two different vehicles, but they both were on the same road.
That's right.
And we could not have gotten the progress that we got in the 60s unless both fought their fights on their fronts. They both were our attorneys. They both were our general attorneys. Malcolm was our offensive general attorney, and Martin was our defensive general attorney. And Martin fought for civil rights, but Malcolm fought for human rights. They both were a danger to the system because the system was about oppressing the masses. It is important to understand that both disciplines are needed when you talk about a revolution. And even though in the beginning they had contrasting views, by the ends of their life, their views were one and the same. Martin, his ideology comes from that of love. And not in the sense that we're going to love our enemies and we're going to let our enemies trample on over us, but we're going to love them to a point that we're going to put pressure on them. And this pressure we're going to put on them is going to cause change. Reverend Dr. King got his his fighting style and fighting method from two people specifically in history. The first being Gandhi, and the second one being Jesus Christ.
Oh, wow, that's right.
So when we look at these examples, you understand that you're going to go through it. Because if you study the life of Jesus Christ, no one that follows him expects to follow his lifestyle and be like him without catching hell on earth.
Right.
And so the reality is, when we look at India being colonized by Britain, and we must study these things to understand our condition, you understand that the people were colonized by Britain, but it wasn't only because Gandhi's nonviolent movement in India did they receive their freedom and independence. There were many things going on in Britain at the same time. There were many violent, militant movements going on in India that the British had to watch out for.
Right.
As the British were trying to exploit the divisions of India, they decided that because there were so many factions and religions and languages, that they would impose their culture. And as they imposed their culture, they did something that was evil, but what they intended for evil, God used for good. The fact that they made all of India learn English allowed these different provinces to now communicate and correlate a strategy against Britain. So there was that fight, but also World War II happened.
Right.
World War II happened, and England went bankrupt. And England winds up letting go of many of its colonies. So yes, we have to give honor to Gandhi for what he did in his work, but it was many different movements driving down this lane of freedom in India. When we talk about the Lord Jesus Christ, we talk
Can I
about
say one thing about Gandhi?
Yes, sir.
Didn't Gandhi learned his rebellion from being in South Africa.
So he learned his from being in South Africa.
Right.
You going to touch on that?
No, you tell us about
Okay,
it.
I'm going to take it all the way back to Jesus. This is where I'm going to. Because Gandhi took his methods from many different places.
Right.
But when we talk about the Reverend Martin Luther King, there's no one he studied more than Jesus Christ.
Okay.
A figure who brought down the Roman Empire through love and through nonviolence. Right? The Jews were expecting a Messiah that was going to bring them together so that they can form a military group to take over the Roman Empire. But Jesus came speaking the kingdom of heaven. He understood that the fight was here before it was here.
Right.
And so Jesus went around educating. He took on the 12. And what we see is that when many think that the life of Jesus Christ was defeated because he was captured and he was hung on a cross, he was spat upon, he was beat. And through all of this, his disciples denied him, the very people that said they would follow him. But when you study the movement of nonviolence and you believe in a man like Jesus, God would raise you up where people put you in the grave. The very people that crucified him winds up worshiping him and creating a calendar from him. So the belief in Jesus Christ is what, in watching his lifestyles, what empowered someone like Martin Luther King to push through, even though he was catching so much hell. Malcolm X, his journey was a lot different, and his fight was a lot different, and it was also very much necessary. He fought for human rights. He went around the world. He went to Africa. He went to Egypt, and he put pressure on those countries to understand, look, they're oppressing us over there, black and brown people. They're just using you for your resources.
That's true.
And he went over there and he spread the message of human rights, and he gained their attention. They tried to kill him over there. But when he got back here, he was able to spread a message worldwide and bring the movement, a strong black African movement, to which we noticed that Martin also joined Black Power movement towards the latter years of his life. So you need both movements to create real radical change. But with all of that said, in history, we're in perilous times, because during their time, there was somebody known as Adolf Hitler, whom you segued into. And Adolf Hitler in history is known as someone who conquered Europe, and also in the same token put all the blame on a group known as the Jews. And this mirrors to current day events. We have an Adolf Hitler today.
That's true.
We have an Adolf Hitler that is doing exactly what Adolf did in Europe, but he's doing here in the Americas. Stoking division, creating hate crimes, making it okay to marginalize different groups. So the question is, what do we do as a people? Because it doesn't get better from here. We need our Martins and our Malcolms to rise up.
Well, I wish I had a roll in about Trump now. Well, let's update
Trump has enough
ourselves.
roll-ins. He got enough roll-ins on the news. He's on the news every other day.
Oh, yeah. This is our modern day Hitler. That's true. Matter of fact, his father was German.
He has roots in the KKK, yeah.
Yeah, he was that's right, he's a son of a KKK man. And he shows it. He shows it well. That's something to think about. And the challenge today is not, it's the wounds of the past, but the challenge is to, where do we have our modern day Joshua, like yourself? How many other people out there, youngsters like your age, that are that aware of where we should be going and what direction we should be taking, how we should be studying history? Huh?
Many are called, but few are chosen.
Yeah, well, I see Reverend Sharpton as being our leader for the time, but I think it's up to us to really gather up forces to fight this demon that's coming at us. A lot of questions are going to be answered, I think, at this election. So it's time to get everybody to vote. This is the most important time for us to stop whatever tribal warfare we have going on amongst each other and take time out to really seriously think about voting. Voting is the most, it's the ballot of the bullet. Now, we're not about to grab guns because we know we're outnumbered. And that's all they need, for us to grab a gun. So we have to use that love element that's more Martin than Malcolm. But Malcolm learned to love in the end.
So I just want to say, Malcolm never led a military crusade into white America.
Right.
Malcolm never led an insurrection.
Right.
And so, yes, his methods and what he said was different, but it was very important for us to see ourselves through the lens that Malcolm was saying. We're in this, but we're not this. Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose?
Right.
That was the message that God gave Malcolm. Where would we be without a Malcolm X? Yes, he went through a lot, and that was his cross to bear. But now it's our time to pick up that cross, and not the cross to stoke division, but the cross to bring us together into a unified democracy. This democracy was created not in the right way. Martin talks about the soul of the nation and how the soul of the nation is in peril. The soul of the nation needs to be saved. And when you're a Christian, you only believe that one person can save your soul. Well, the nation needs to be saved by this one person. Yes, I'm going to vote. Yes, I'm going to participate in the democratic process. But I'm waiting on the one who can take on the government of the world himself. I'm waiting for Jesus Christ to come back. I'm waiting
but you are that Jesus.
Well, I'm going to take on the work of the Lord, of course.
Yeah, you are
of
that
course.
Jesus.
You know, I pray that I catch a wind and that he takes over, that he speaks when I'm...
You look in the mirror and see Jesus.
Well, as you know, the word says, if I walk like him, if I walk like him, I'm him.
That's right.
But there's much that we need to do. And so that the soul of this nation needs to come back together.
When I was 15, my substitute teacher, I told you a story already, about I was in church, and I thought they wanted me to become a minister because my name means worker for Christ. So I was 14 at the time, and I said, no, the last thing I want to become is a minister. And you became a minister at 10. So we all have that calling. We want to be Christ-like, but with the elements and all, well, the devil's busy all the time. And always, especially if you're in this atmosphere, this materialistic atmosphere. The devil's busy, but you are fortunate enough to find your way at an early age. So this is a calling for you.
You know, it's funny that you segue into to this. I, like many youth, were lost. And when I say by lost, I was shown the streets and going down a path of many of my family are in the streets. As a young man, my mother pressed education, but I couldn't find or see myself through education, through the books that my teachers were giving me. I didn't see myself succeeding in that. And at the age of 10, I had did so much that I regretted those things. And I didn't want to go down that road. And I cried out to God, and I went to church. And God spoke back to me. And he told me that I was chosen. But I had to wait on the answer. I was 10 years old. I could not read because at 10 I could not read. My mother had to come to the school all the time because I was doing things to my classmates. But in the church, I learned how to read. I prayed to God, and he would teach me through his word how to read. And he also, more importantly, taught me about himself. And the work that happened was that my soul began to be healed through the Bible. And the Holy Spirit is real. God is real. And so it's all about giving him the time, as you would a woman or any relationship, for him to come into your life and for him to walk with you, for him to talk with you, for him to take you by the hand. So I grew up without a father. I grew up without many friends, but he came into my life and he was everything I needed. And America needs this God that came into my life.
Amen. Amen. I always say a black man without God is a dead man.
I'm gonna say all men need God, because selfishness leads us down a road of destruction.
Exactly. Yeah, well said. I stand in addition to that, you know what I said. But I specify black people because we have so many different devils coming at us all the time, and it's our training, our brainwashing, and just life itself. But I know I wouldn't be alive if I didn't have God in my life. You know what I mean? I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't have God in my life.
Amen.
Because I know what I've been the devils. I've been in the demonic spirit. I've seen it, felt it, lived it. So you got to get to know it all.
And this is important because it segues. We could talk about Martin all day into what Malcolm's importance was. The soul of the nation is corrupt and in darkness. But Malcolm did something. He called out and prosecuted this nation because we are, as you say, a marginalized people. And yes, we're in darkness, and yes, everybody needs to get saved, but our oppression is not okay. So Malcolm condemned this country. He condemned them, and it's true. This country is not going to be judged by me. You're going to be judged by God for marginalizing a people, for treating a people for 500 years this way. Who do you think you are? How long do you think you're going to get away with this? What riches have you gained that is worth losing your soul? This is the message that came before us, and this is the message that will go forth. Just like the people of Sodom and Gomorrah in the book of Ezekiel were judged because they marginalized the poor. So with this country and every other nation that marginalizes.
Let's show why they killed Malcolm. All right? Run the end of 4, and we'll come back to Minister Ronald. That 4?
Fascinated that there was a brother who lived in the projects, and he called me aside and he said, I'll tell you why Malcolm was killed. I said, what do you mean? He said, coming up to my apartment. So I went, and he gave me a recording he had made of Malcolm at one of his speeches. And so for the first time, I heard Malcolm unedited, in context.
The media's coverage
of
Malcolm versus the real deal.
It was awful. And so I learned about Malcolm, and I realized that I had been had. I realized that
You
I
had
had
bought
missed.
what the media had told you.
Yes, I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. But when I heard Malcolm's entire presentation, everything fell in line, and it was logical. And it made me understand that there's no sin in being angry. In fact, if you're not angry, there's something wrong with you.
And why do you think Malcolm was killed?
I think
The
there's
real issues.
I think that there are a number of reasons why he was killed. And it's a very, very painful reality that we need to deal with. He was a threat to America's global ambitions. He had done a lot in Africa to awaken the African countries and let them understand that they should not be a victim of the courtship that American businesses were engaged in, the Peace Corps and all these things, because they don't love you. They want your minerals. If they did, look what they're doing to us, and we're your brothers and sisters. Look what they're doing to us in, you know, Mississippi and whatnot. And so many of them began to quote Malcolm on the floor of the United Nations, ironically. So I think that that's one dimension that the State Department, and they tried to kill him when he was in Egypt. They poisoned him, but he had his stomach pumped and he survived. So that was one dimension. Then there were the authorities here in this country that also wanted him to leave this life. And then there was a lot of factionalism within the Nation of Islam. And there was a lot of greed, there was a lot of ambitiousness, and there was a lot of friction, because the Nation of Islam had grown into an economic colossus.
And self-sufficiency.
They were self-sufficient.
The same things that your parents practiced.
Exactly. And they were a threat. They had their own schools. They had their own religion.
Food.
They had their own name, their own diet. They were self-sufficient. And that was a threat.
Big time.
And so I think that there are some people who were in the nation who, see, many of the people who had been fished by Malcolm into joining the nation had been on the street like he had. And a lot of them, as the money started to come in, some of the old temptations began to take over. I interviewed a man, Talmadge Hayer, in prison, and he told me that he thought that Malcolm was a hypocrite and that he was wrong in bad-mouthing Elijah. He told me this on camera.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me how they went about assassinating him and, you know, how determined they were to take him out.
He really believed it, you think?
Oh, he really did. He thought, and the more Malcolm protested, the angrier they became. And so he took me right through. He was one of the gunmen. He had a pistol, and he described how there were 3 gunmen. One had a rifle and 2 had pistols. He was one of the gunmen. The rifle went off first and struck down Malcolm, and the 2 men with revolvers went up to the stage and emptied their revolvers. Mm-hmm. And he told me that he was convinced that he had done the right thing, you know. And I asked him, I said, in your life, have you ever so much as spat at a member of the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klan? Or did you ever smack one? And he dropped his head and he said, no.
Did he understand the meaning of that question, do you think?
I made it clear.
Mm-hmm.
But he said that it wasn't until years later, while in prison, that he came to understand that Malcolm was not lying, he was not wrong, and that there was corruption. And he had a nervous breakdown in prison because he realized that who he had taken off.
Yes, exactly.
You know, so.
There's a good history lesson. How we have tribal warfare and how we have to unite for the present day devil, Donald Trump. And we have to realize there's one race, the human race, and learn the lessons of the past. And a modern day Joshua's, like Minister McHenry is come to us, and we're going to see more of him, and we're going to see how his training, his calling is going to benefit all the people around him. Because here today you've taught us that there's hope. You've taught me there's hope in the youth. All right? Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. It is God who raises up.
That's
It is
right.
God who empowers. And all you have to do is listen to his voice. He'll speak to you. Keep your ear open.
Yeah, that's my famous closing. The God in me loves the God in you.
Amen.
And this is the theme that's always on the Gilchrist experience. So we're going through another change, and how are we going to fight this devil that we have out there now?
The devil that's here now is no different from the devil that was before.
Oh, he's a little different because he's convinced. Oh, well, we always knew racism.
So
was
let me say this differently.
Okay.
The puppet is different, but the hand that's moving the puppet is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Before him, there was a Hitler. Before him, there was a Nebuchadnezzar. There was always someone that wanted to conquer the world and marginalize groups of people to do it.
Okay.
The way we do it is we organize, we get together. People, you need to get involved, right? Get involved in an organization that's greater than yourself. Black people, brown people, we need to get back to the church. We need to get back to the things that matter. Let us not be hypnotized by the sales that are on your Instagram account and all these other things in social media that are distracting us from the things that matter. Well, so what do matter? Your family matters. Your prayer life matters. We need to get back to community. Without community, we are going to drown. And so it is important to understand the life of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and to understand that their lives in many ways mirrors that of Jesus Christ.
Right.
When Jesus was betrayed, he was betrayed by one of his own. But
That's
it
true.
wasn't just one of his own. One of his own was manipulated by the government to be.
That's right.
Malcolm and Martin weren't just killed by just people that were in their circle. They were killed by people who were put up to the task by a phantom government. They throw rocks and hide their hand. But we must understand who the enemy is. And that is the importance of Malcolm X's work and Martin's work. To understand that the enemy is not you nor me. That we must love each other, come together to build a better community.
And with that, again, it's the Gilchrist experience. And the God in me loves the God in you. And stay tuned for more of the Gilchrist experience. And we have a loving generation that we're putting out there, and vote. That's showing that democracy does work. And that's what we have to really concentrate on. Democracy working. And rid the devil by voting. Peace, and love, and power to the people. God bless.